Our final interview is between the Royal Photographic Society Journal's editor Kathleen Morgan, lovely lady,
hello,
and internationally acclaimed photographer David Eustace. Please welcome them.
Thank you very much, folks. Can you hear me? Excellent, good start. I'd like to introduce you to an acclaimed photographer who made his name on the pages of Vogue, GQ, and it was mentioned earlier, Tatler. But a good few other magazines beside. I first met David when I was working on The List magazine. Anyone remember The List? I wrote his story for The List magazine, and he's got an amazing story. You'll hear more about that later. Later on, we collaborated on a magazine called The Herald magazine, and there are a few folk in this audience that involves. Principally Ali Palmer, who was the man who reinvented it and designed it. We've got the picture editor at the time, Elaine Livingston, and we've got Craig Alexander, and we've got Angela Catlin, who's a photographer as well. So there's a few people that all know David and have a lot of respect for him. During his 30 years behind the camera, he's earned a reputation as a brilliant portrait photographer. Principally, that's what people might know David for, but also as a photographic artist, because in later years he has started doing amazing personal projects as well, and we'll see some of that. His work is held in private and public collections, including that of the National Portrait Gallery, and his disarming manner, which you're about to witness. He just asked me if he's allowed to swear. Could be a problem if he's not. Has won him the respect of his subjects from Sir Paul McCartney to Glasgow street buskers. Now he is giving something back as the Chancellor of Edinburgh Napier University. I think this is year 4, is it, David? Yep. So year 4 of 5 years as Chancellor, and inspiring young people to take pictures, but so much more besides. So I'd like to just pass you over to David. First of all, to talk about, if we maybe move on, I can't use a clicker, there's no clicker tonight, but I'd like you, first of all, to have a look at that scape there. This was an image that David did for the Herald magazine, which at that time had lofty ambitions, obviously. Tell us a wee bit about that image, David.
Hello, can you hear me okay with this? Yeah, right. I mean, I don't know where to start. I don't even know why I'm sitting here. Many of you guys have been part of the journey, so you'll probably remember more than I was, and I was there all the time. That image was, and it's a long story. It is a long story, but one of the things I always wanted to do when I was younger was visit New York. And I was going to New York maybe 4 or 5 times a year, and I was doing well in the UK, and I remember people saying to me, "You're a mug if you're going to go to New York because you're going to give up all your contacts here." I was 40, and I rented an apartment for 3 months, and I kept it for 15 years. And that was the first story I had made for Kathleen and Craig and the guys at the Herald. And it was on the rooftops, and it's funny, that's in the middle, it's 47th Street in Hell's Kitchen. And that's all changed now. A lot of it has anyway. But for me, it was part of a story, you know, and I don't know what
yeah. This kind of image was quite, wasn't unusual for the type of photography that we were producing for the fashion pages at the time. I remember having a stand-up argument with the editor at the time, Mark Douglas Hume, where he said, "Where is the fashion? Where is the fashion?" And we're like, "It doesn't matter, it's inspirational." And it absolutely was inspirational, and that is what underpins David's work. We've talked briefly about your 40s, so if we sort of rewind a little bit to his birth. We're going to start at the very beginning, and
it's funny you saying that, because I do a talk, and maybe some of you have been here, it's called Daft Ideas, and my life has been this whole chaos of daft ideas. And I was joking about it because I started off as a daft idea. But my mother was a young girl, 22-year-old from the Highlands, who went to a party one Saturday night, met a guy that she thought was good looking, probably alcohol involved, and went to the doctors 6 months later saying, "I feel ill," and the doctor saying, "You're more than ill, you're pregnant." So I started off as a daft idea. But you know, it's like everything else, it's, for me, this journey for me seems really normal, because it was normal. And one of the things is, this didn't happen overnight. This is over, I'm 57 now, so this is over a period of 57 years. But I remember finding this was a letter And that opening line's the longest title to a photographic book you're ever going to see, with no photographs on the front cover. But I wanted to do it because for me part of it was, I love the idea that strangers, even though separated, will have common links and how you can affect other people's lives without knowing that you're doing it. So, to cut a long story short, I was born, my mother was, as I say, a young girl from the Highlands, who I've now got back in contact with. And she said 1960, 61 was a very different time for young girls and anywhere. And one of the things she didn't want to do was bring shame on the family in up north. So she jumped on a bus and started cleaning houses in Glasgow. She met up with two young girls from Ireland. And she told me a story how one of them used to have to stay awake at night because of the rats in the room. Anyway, cut a long story short, Glasgow had a bit of a reputation in the early 60s.
Remember, this is Edinburgh we're in, David.
Yes, I know.
Let's be polite about this.
Well, it still amazes me when they give me a microphone. And so, 3 days before I was born, she had this, she was 22, she wasn't thinking straight, she said herself. She jumped on a bus to Edinburgh hoping I would be adopted by a better, well-to-do family. And the kind of irony was I was adopted 2 days after I was born and taken to Provan Mill, which wasn't exactly Bel Air back in the 60s. But it was brilliant because I had the best upbringing that anybody could ever hope for. I don't know what we didn't have and I didn't know what we did have, but I had everything I ever needed. Friendship, family, love, security. I had all the important things and had a brilliant adventure. And I guess I've always looked at life like a journey of some sort. So it was brilliant for me, you know.
Okay. So David, just a couple of, we're going to fast forward a little bit. You were in the Royal Naval Reserves, is that right? The Royal Navy Reserves, and then began a career as a prison officer at Her Majesty's Prison, Barlinnie in Glasgow. So that was your local prison, wasn't it? North of Glasgow.
These were all daft ideas, you know. They were my life is just full of these, but they've been brilliant. And what you learn from daft ideas is there's no such thing. I think it's all to do with your mind. And it was 1981, and to cut a long story short, there'd been a gang incident where I grew up, and on Christmas Eve, 3 of us got arrested for a murder of a friend that we didn't know. But it was, again, it's putting into perspective that half of the boys went into the town, half of the boys stayed local, and you were all just drinking, young boys. And basically a fight had broke out, and one had punched the other guy's father, and he choked in his own blood and died. It was one of these stupid things, alcohol, that the jails are full of it in Scotland. And I thought, you know what, I need to get out of here. So me and 2 of the other boys went to join the Navy. And the Navy apparently had no jobs left until the Falklands kicked off, and then all of a sudden the fun boats and the fun jobs. And we were, at the time we were R&R, we were in the minesweepers, and we were taken on full time, realistically. But I loved it. I met some great boys, great laugh, and still to this day, you know, I'm good friends with them all. And then I was 21, I joined at 18, and 21, I was looking for a full-time job. So I grew up next to the prison. It's a bit like if you grew up in Peterhead, there's a fair chance you're going to work in the fishing boats, or if you grew up in, you know, places where there's mines, you know, it was that period in time. And at that point, I was always straightforward, and I knew a lot of people who were in jail, working in it and serving time, and I knew that you know, it's like everything else. I knew I could hopefully do a good job in it, and what I mean by that is try and be fair with people. So, and it was a thing to do. You've got to remember, it was another world. I was 21 and I was living in the East End. I hadn't travelled. So I applied and I became a prison officer.
Okay. You worked through some of the most difficult times, that's one word for it, at Barlinnie Prison and prisons up and down Scotland. There were the prison riots that kind of went through the whole of Scotland at that time. It came to Barlinnie at the prison siege in 1987. 87.
There's more trouble getting me off the roof. I'm terrified of heights.
Yeah. So you were actually, I mean,
well, I was actually off sick when that happened the week before.
But there's more to this. There's more to this.
2 of us had pulled a guy out of fire who was determined to kill himself. He'd set his cell in fire. And with these mattresses back in the day, they were black smoke, so you could never see them. So your adrenaline's pumping, you're in, we pulled the guy out, we managed to save him, but you're coughing up like tar. So I thought, you know what, I'm off for 3 days. I took 3 days off, and my wife woke me up one morning and she said, they're up on the roof. So I went back into work, and I remember working that shift. So the riot had been the night before, most of that, I missed most of that, but it wouldn't have been my shift anyway. So I went back and I was working that day, and I always remember one of the chiefs saying to me, you're off sick. I said, I know, but I've seen this in the news and I got the uniform. I'm going, as long as you know you're not getting paid for this. And I thought, really? So, and it was wee silly things, you know, a lot of it is if you'd let the people who worked in it deal with it, that most of that siege, or any riot, the most dangerous things the first couple of minutes. It would kick off any time. You knew something was going to go down. You're always aware of it. And it's really difficult to put it into perspective if nobody... Has anybody in here ever been in the armed forces? Oh, fuck, my next question was going to be, has anybody served in you know, in a battlefront or anything like that? Anybody ex-police? No. Anybody got a job? But there are situations in which generally... Any nurses? Thank you. But you know what it's like, a lot of the time you have to, and it's not cold, but it's survival and it lets you go back to your work the next day. You have to look at the world possibly in a different circumstance than people who have no concept of what's going on within that environment have to. And that's never meant as a cold way. But if you're going to open a door at 6 o'clock in the morning and that guy's sitting ready to go to the showers, you open the next door and he's hanging, and you open the next door and he's running at you with a blade. That's what you don't know what you're doing.
So this is the kind of thing that you were facing every day.
That's what most prison officers
So during that period, David, that was the first time really that you'd picked up a camera. One of your friends gave you a camera?
Well, no, because at that point, after the riots, there was always, you hear about the ones that come to the news, but they were happening a lot. And then the Peterhead one kicked off as well, and that's when they sent in the air service. And I just thought, you know what, I'm not doing this for the rest of my life. And I had started taking pictures as a hobby, and I thought, you know what, maybe I could take this further. So I went to a camera club and I entered this competition. This is what I'm always getting a wee bit embarrassed about. I won first, second and third prize. But then I always joke about it saying, but there's only 2 of us in it. Another guy never had a camera. But no, I thought to myself, maybe there's something in this. And I decided to go and study photography, to go back to full-time education. I'd left college or school, I never went to college, school with no qualifications. So I was going back as a mature student. So that was it.
Okay. So you went to, was it Edinburgh Napier University?
I went to actually College of Building and Print in Glasgow.
Yep.
And 2 of the lecturers there said to me, you should actually apply to the degree course through Napier. I says, where's through at Napier? And they said Edinburgh. And we were living in Partick at the time. And I did, and these were the days you went to university 5 days a week, no 5 minutes a week, you know. So, but I loved it, and most people were saying again to me, you know, when I was leaving the jail, people would say, you know, that's a daft idea because, you know, you've got a secure job, we're always going to have customers. And it's true. And again, you've got to remember, it was, and it's humorous, but it's only humorous in reflection. At the time, it was normal, and I'm thinking, I'm doing the right thing. Dearly, my wife was a school teacher. And I decided to drive to Edinburgh every day, and I loved it. Now, some people would see that as, oh, but to me it was an adventure, it was a journey. You got up in the morning, get a couple of rolls and sausage and listen to music driving through Edinburgh. It's not that exactly hard compared to what I had just left.
Okay, so I'm going to move on so that we can see more of David's work as well. This slide in particular is quite important at this juncture because at that time, David, tell us about going to New York, meeting Albert Watson, who's the gentleman on the left there.
Well, again, some of you guys are older, so you know what the world was like without the internet and without emails. So the only way you could contact, and it was magazines at the time, there weren't that many compared to what there is today. And one of the guys' work I kept seeing was that I enjoyed, was at Condé Nast, was Albert's. And I knew nothing about this guy, I didn't even know he was Scottish. And I made this wee portfolio and I sent it off. Well, I got the number, I phoned up British Vogue and I asked, I need an address for Albert Watson. They gave me the address and I sent it off to New York.
Yeah.
And what happened was,
Turned up at his door.
I phoned up thereafter, and I said, he said, yeah, I've seen your portrait. It wasn't Albert. It was funny because it was a lady called Diana who turned out to be one of my best friends. And Diana said, Albert's coming over to Edinburgh next week, and I was still a student. And I said, right, okay. She said, so we'll take you on as an assistant for a week. And Albert was the only guy I ever assisted. I assisted him for a week. One other chap in Airdrie when I was at the summer holidays for a couple of days. And I worked with Albert but I was a driver, that's all I did. I just drove the van about. And Albert, at the end of it, said to me, I saw your work, David, who's representing you? And I said, well, I'm still at college. And he said, will you ever come to New York, look me up? So that was 92. So many years later I went to New York, and then Elizabeth, who's Albert's wife, became my agent in New York for years. It was like we Scottish Mafia. There was Albert, Norman, her son, and me. So that was the sort of.
Okay, yeah. Just a little nod to the picture on the right there. Does anyone know who that is? Eve Arnold. Who said Eve Arnold? Ah, the picture of it. You're supposed to be muzzled. So Eve Arnold, much revered by photographers, but David in this case probably didn't know who she was, but was shooting her for Vogue or something.
No, it's for British. It was with a brilliant stylist who sort of called Anna Harvey, who was old school Vogue. And this is one of the things I love about photography. It's not so much necessarily the finished image. And Eve and I became relatively friendly after this portrait. And it's the stories, it's the ideas, and it's that moment to listen to other people. And I remember a story Eve Arnold told me, because seeing that we were shooting that in London, and the studio next door was Madonna. And it was funny because all the young photo assistants had no interest in Madonna, but they were thinking this is Eve Arnold. And it was a 12-page story called 12 Women for British Vogue. But Eve Arnold, after that, I would visit her. She lived in Mount Street in London. And she told me this story. I like telling people. It's a lovely thing. After the magazine was published, she phoned me and she said, I've just sent you something. And literally at that point, the door went. We were living in the West End. And I opened the door and there was a guy with a big package. I opened it up, and I don't know if you guys know the famous shot of Marilyn Monroe in the desert and the Misfits, and she's standing profile. So it says, and it just signed with gratitude from Eve to David. And she told me the story about that later on when we had tea, because she used to have tea. And she said, these were the days when photographers got access to talent. And she was telling the story, they were doing it in the salt flats in Nevada, and Marilyn came in at the Winnebago, which is just like a motorhome, 110 degrees, dripping in sweat. She just done the scene under these lights. I mean, the fucking desert, and they still stick these big lights up. Anyway, so they filmed this whole scene. Marilyn came in and she was stinking in sweat, and she was just lying back in the Winnebago. And Marilyn said to Eve, "Don't photograph me. I want to look beautiful." And Eve says, "Marilyn, you are beautiful. I'm making you interesting." And that's the kind of stuff that you only get at. That's what's important to me in photography.
Okay,
you know?
okay. I mean, on that note, for me, David, what makes you a great photographer is that your portraits are candid. You know, you feel like you've got a moment there. You've just captured a moment, but they're also searching. There's something. There's more to it. There's a story behind the image. For me, anyway. Don't know if you feel the same way, but that's how I feel.
I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do it one way.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
So if we move on, we can see some of the pictures. Does anyone know who that is? So Robbie Coltrane, but not as you know straight away who it is. Yeah. But you don't see his face, and that is part of the magic of that image for me. Don't know about you?
Well, that was my first ever GQ cover. I'd just graduated. I'd made. Again, it sounds a bit arsey. I hope it doesn't come across that way. But I'd graduated, and my first year I had made 4 covers for GQ, and there is only 12. So it's quite a big thing. But to me, it wasn't. You know, I was just like, this was the first one. So it was really interesting. And I'd photographed Robbie Coltrane a couple of years before that for a student project. So this was the cover, and I remember photographing him. You get that distance between you, and there's a lot of people there. And we got on really well, and then he leaned across and he said, "I'm getting bored now, David." So I said, "Right, turn round, I'm going to do the back cover." And we just joked about it, and he turned round and made 2 frames of it, and that was it.
Okay, good stuff. Next one, if we can have a look at. John Hurt makes me cry every time I see that, because I love John Hurt.
Well, that was in Edinburgh.
Yeah,
We've done that. In fact, was that not for you? No, it was the Telegraph. It was the Telegraph. We made that in the roof, and again, there's a story, but there's a story with everything, and that's where I hopefully don't bore you or sound like. But again, it was all these. This is the beauty of photography for me. It's an introduction to me, and I remember going to LA. I was doing a portrait of Alec Baldwin for Vanity Fair. They do this thing called the Hollywood portfolio, and it was Liz Watson that got me. So I had the place in New York. I was going over to Los Angeles to do this, and I was staying in, I can't remember what it was, Sunset Marquis or something, one of the hotels. It wasn't Chateau Marmont, it was Sunset Marquis. And I remember walking out, and I just heard this noise, and it's a very famous English photographer. I'm not going to slag anybody else, but it was a whole production, and I thought, and I knew who it was right away. I thought, I'm avoiding this like the plague. So I went to a quiet corner, and there's a guy sitting reading the newspaper, and he closes the newspaper, and it's John Hurt. And I says, you'll not remember me, but I photographed you on the rooftop of the George Hotel in Edinburgh. He says, I do remember that. He says, did it end up a headshot? I said, that's the one. He says, why did we do it in the roof? I said, I don't know. But anyway, and he was making a movie called The Skeleton Key, so it was round about then. And he said, do you fancy a drink? And this was maybe about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I said, yeah. He said, let's go over to Chateau Marmont. So him and I went over to Chateau Marmont, and 6:15 the next morning, I was still steaming. And I had to photograph Alec Baldwin the next day. So
Oh no.
Anyway,
Okay. Just looking at that frame there, the camera is right in John Hurt's face. We might want to sort of skip a couple of, if we go forward maybe, Nikki, to a lady called Sophia Loren. Now, I got this idea from Angie, who's a photographer, on the way on the train over here. She's like, this is what I'd like to know from David Eustace. And I just think this is a good time to talk about it. She is further back from the camera. She is composed, cool looking. It's not right in her face. Do you photograph women and men differently, David?
no. Well, I hope not. Well, I don't think so. But I don't know. But I photograph men differently than I photograph men, and I photograph women differently than I photograph women. Okay. And I don't really see it as men and women, because I think there's a whole bunch of people in between just men and women. I photograph people the way I think it should be. I think society has put something on it where, Eve Arnold's one of the most beautiful women I've ever photographed, but she was 80 odd. So that sort of goes against what a lot of people's perception of what beauty is. But John Hurt to me is beautiful as well.
Me too.
But then you could take somebody, but you know what I mean, it's that thing. So there's a kind of thing, it's how you measure beauty. And I think if you get through 80 odd years of your life, you get quite a beautiful life, you know. So no, the short answer is no, but I will consider things. I will consider, I won't ever go out to take a good photograph, but I certainly won't go out to do a bad one. I just go to do a photograph. So I don't think, you know, one way or the other.
Okay.
I've got the same respect for hopefully all people.
Okay,
You know?
okay. So going back, yay!
If that was good going to write it down so I can remember it.
So just going back a couple of frames there. So we've got, anyone recognise this gentleman? James Earl Jones. Yay. That was for the Herald magazine.
That was one of the coolest things, because he'd left me a voicemail and he was Darth Vader. And I had to admit to him, and I've still never seen Star Wars. So I didn't know that, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. And this gentleman? Yes. Harry Dean Stanton. Okay. So, you know, the environment in those two cases is as important as the person, or it looks that way.
Well, that was a friend of mine who is a cinematographer, a DOP, called Camus McGarvey. And I was going out to do a personal project in Death Valley. And I was flying back from Glasgow to New York, watching one of these airline movies. And there was a thing on Harry Dean Stanton, a film, and I watched it to the end and I thought, I know that director. And then it came up DOP and I thought, I know that director of photography. So I arrived in New York and I emailed Seamus and I said, I see you've just done a thing with Harry, I would love to do his portrait. And Seamus says, when are you coming out to the West Coast? I says, I'm actually coming out next week, I'm going to do a project in Death Valley. And he said to me, and this is, as God is my witness, a true story, he said, right, I'll put a wee party on, we'll have some pizza and wine, come at the house and I'll get Harry Dean up. So I thought, fine, and I flew into Las Vegas or something, somewhere, and I was heading to the deserts, and I thought, you know what, I love that whole part of the world. I'll go over to LA. So I drove over to LA, showed up at Seamus's, and Seamus is putting this party on. And it was just this, a lot of, you guys are writers, I'm dyslexic, I've not read that much, but there's a lot of well-known writers, Bret Ellis Easton and the guy done being John Malkovich and all these sort of guys. And it was just a really pizza and wine party. And Harry walks in. So he said, David, I want you to meet Harry before he goes out and meets everybody else. So I sat down, and he's got a little British Airways first class bag, a 1970s one. I think I got that for. And we sits down, and he unzips it. And he says, you're from Glasgow? I can't do his accent. When I say Glasgow, it sounds like Glasgow, the only way I know Glasgow. But he says, you're from Glasgow, or whatever it is. And I said, yeah. He said, I love Glasgow. He said, I made a movie there, I didn't know about it. And he said, Seamus picked up a little, not a ukulele, but a small guitar. And I got a full rendition, and it was a lovely story because I'm sitting and I never picked the camera up, I just left the camera. And he gave me a full rendition of I Belong to Glasgow. And he knew every single word. Now, halfway through, you get Seamus on guitar, but in Harry's little bag was 5 harmonicas. And each one had a bit of tape on it with A, B, I'm not musical. And he's playing, singing this at the same time. Then we're joined by this other guy, and he starts joining in as well. And I'm thinking, this is surreal. And you're overlooking LA, and you've got Harry Dean Stanton playing the harmonica, Seamus McGarvey playing the guitar, singing I Belong to Glasgow. And then at the very end of it, Harry stopped, and he turned around to this other guy and goes, and who are you? Because Seamus hadn't introduced him. He says, I'm an actor, I'm John C. Reilly. And Harry goes, never heard of you. And that's it.
Brilliant, good stuff.
So that day, he was drinking, God knows what time. And I said, Harry, I'd like to make your portrait. He says, come to the house tomorrow at 2 o'clock. And Seamus and I went up at 2 o'clock, and that was made the next day.
Okay, that's a classic. Okay, you've described yourself in these words, and I'm sorry I can't attribute to the journalist because I can't remember who wrote it, but this quote is amazing. Steel toe cap trainers from Screwfix, 1995. That's me, Armani jacket, but steel toe cap trainers.
Right, I tell you who
Is
it
that
was.
your secret,
It was
David?
Robert Peary. Do you guys know Robert Peary? Right, Robert's a photographer who I think still works at the Herald. Yes. And Robert's wee granny grew up in Ridley, and I knew his wee granny because she stayed up next close, so I've got a lot of time for Robert. Plus, he's as deaf as me, so I wear hearing aids, so did Robert. Well, the conversations we must be fun. So is John, he's as deaf as a post as well. Anyway, Robert was doing a thing for the Herald, and he said to me, I love your trainers, and I had a really nice, it was just a car coat thing, an Armani car coat. But I'd been working in a house and I bought a lovely pair of Screwfix trainers, and they're steel toe caps. So that's what I said to Robert. I said, I wear what I'm comfortable in, So that's what it was, an Armani jacket store. And it's true.
Got into the piece, brilliant. If we move on, I know that we're running out of time here, Nikki, but I just want to show you some of the other work that David's done. This you just passed, that was a fashion shoot. So his fashion work is amazing because it pushes boundaries in lots of different ways. That gentleman, is he still with us, David?
I don't know. He was a model, yeah. But it turns out, has any of you guys ever seen the movie Braveheart? And I didn't know this at the time. He's the guy, when they're going to kill Mel Gibson, or William Wallace at the end, he says, kiss the cloak or something. I didn't know that, because he was telling me that day, and sure enough, I googled it, and he was the guy that done it. I remember David, I think it was, that he was a model.
Okay, and then the next one we've got, again, that's fashion. That was a fashion shoot that David did. So just to show you that it's not just celebrity, what I want to do is then move on to one of David's personal projects that probably means an awful lot to him because it involved a road trip across America, and it involved travelling with his daughter, who was then 16.
Well, that was the next photograph. That was for a road trip. I used to spend a lot of time driving with him, but the next one is this one. She was 17, just turning 17. And it was called In Search of Eustace, and there was a company called Anthropology, and they approached me. I was working for them a couple of days, a month in New York doing fashion, and they said, we want you to launch this web initiative called The Anthropologist. And I said, what's that about? And they said, well, we inspire a lot of young, primarily. It's aimed at that time, I think it was aimed at, I can't remember their photo, but 18 to 36-year-old women to buy a $65 frock. And I said, right, I want to go on a road trip. But they said, you get carte blanche, do what you want. So I said, I'm going to go on a road trip. And I always remember this is part of Staff Diarrhea talk as well, that I said to the creative director, who was originally from Scotland, so he understood what I was saying. And I said to him, right, what, anything? He says, any you want. I said, right, I'm going to go on a road trip with Rachel. And we went on this road trip.
Okay.
I know I'm really aware of time, so
this is the same road trip as that, David?
No, that's for USA Network.
Right,
that was called Highway 50, where I made 50 portraits along Highway 50 from San Francisco to Chesapeake Bay.
Okay, so again, this is your
that's for
more
Highway 50 as well.
Personal
that's
work.
One of the 50 portraits.
Okay.
All my stuff's pretty personal.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember at the Herald, you saying to me one time, Mark was saying, we don't want anything out of focus. I deliberately went and shot everything out of focus. Because it's editorial, and that's, you know, there's that thing that you just do it. Poor Craig, that's how he was getting his hair lift.
Okay, some nude
series of nudes,
photography.
Yep,
series of nudes. And then this, I love this.
Is
I had never seen this till the other day.
This because it took me 13 years. I came up with the idea to do this series. It was almost like a series of self-portraits. And it's not even about New York, it's not about a clown, it's about how you find a new world and you find this magical world. And I started it 13 years ago in New York, obviously. I made one frame. Then there was a show at the Royal Academy and they asked me to do this self-portrait and put this clown's mask on. And then I knew I was leaving New York, so I thought, I'm going to finish This Clown Comes to Town. And that's just a working title. And I made these images. And so that was 13 years after I started. I went out and I shot it over a period of maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And it was great. And I got it ready and I was very happy with it. Then all these clowns started appearing. And it was nothing to do with me, but they were all angry, mad wee clowns wanting to kill people. But mine was a happy wee soul. And I thought, just put it in the cupboard. So it's never been exhibited it.
Well, there you go, you're exhibiting it now.
Well, that's one eye. That.
Okay. I think just to open up to any questions that people might have for David.
Any questions?
And you will need to shout at me,
I've got a loud Belfast voice, we'll be fine. For an awkward question, you've told us some lovely stories about famous folk you've spoken to and photographed. I always want to know who was the one that was really, really awkward, that you had a really hard time getting a good picture out of them.
Nobody really. I mean, but I think it's how you deal with them. You know, awkward people are there's usually a reason why they're awkward. And a lot of them are, I remember one time going to LA and saying to an actor, I want you to be yourself. And he said to me, David, I don't know how to do that. So, you know, a lot of people, it's a mask. One guy who wasn't awkward, but I think he was suffering from a hangover, and I can't really say, but he was Irish and he was a racing driver. And he said to me, and it wasn't me, I think it was Tyler we were doing it for, and he was giving the young stylist a hard time, and that's what annoyed me more than anything. But I don't think it was awkward, I just think he was having a bad time. But I've never met, no, I wouldn't put up with that. It's not I wouldn't put up with it, just, you deal with it before it happens, you know, so there's nobody that's been really awkward. You get some young kid that walks in and they think there's this and that, and then you go, seen it, you know.
Hello.
Hello.
I'd like to know about Albert, because Albert only had one eye, didn't he?
Still only got it as far as I know.
So he was called the Cyclops, wasn't he? And his black and white images were made to be because he could see a different way to everyone else.
Stories get romanticised. Now, I can't say that about Albert's, but they do, of course they do. Stories become, you know, something different. I think Albert sees equally as well in colour as he saw in black and white.
Oh no, I think he sees in colour, but I think he. I met Norman.
I think he's
I was
seen
lucky
things
enough to
slightly
Norman
different, but I think.
But he said that Norman used to close one eye to see what his father saw.
It's very difficult to look at someone with two eyes open. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And it's that thing. What I think Albert said one time that's really pertinent, and it's true. I don't know if it still applies today. That, you know, back in the day, because Albert was still is a beautiful printer. Albert made all his own prints, and that was something we used to have to do because there was no choice. You know, in New York you could get good printers, but primarily you done it yourself. And he used to always say there's a vision or a line. I can't quote it as exactly, but there was a line that went from your mind, your imagination, through your eye, through a camera, onto a final print. So you knew you were going to get, but that's. You know, that was par for the course. That was the standards. That's when you had an author's voice, you know, when you could tell someone's work or you could tell who it was through their work. You know, so Albert very much had a focused point on it. Yeah.
Hi there. Yeah, really good talk. Thanks very much. And great to see all the photography. So we've talked a lot about the old days, and you were obviously shooting in film in those days. Do you still shoot on film, or do you have you moved into digital?
Well, I moved into
completely?
digital because of purpose. I was doing a thing for Coca-Cola in 2007 in New York, and I was talking to this was about that earlier on today. In fact, 2007 digital was still relatively new, and there's a couple of things. You know, I see a lot of young kids now, to a certain extent, romanticising film. Film is the most precious thing anybody in this room's got is time. When you work with film, it gives you an element of time. And when I was doing this project in 2007, it was for Coca-Cola. And they asked me to go, well, it was one of these jobs that went from New York to Atlanta, Atlanta to Rio de Janeiro to Paris, Paris to St. Petersburg to Moscow, Moscow to Beijing, Beijing to Seoul, Seoul back to Beijing, and then Beijing to New York. Now, to try and do that in film would have been a nightmare going through customs. So I shot digital for the first time. But the problem with it was I never gave it the same thought, because to a certain extent you had an endless roll of film, and it was like a monkey in a machine gun. You know, and I wasn't thinking about what I was doing. And one of the things, when I was asked only the other week there, a student said to me, what's the difference between, that I find, and this is generalisation, between digital and analog. And I think it's digital makes it easier for those who know what they're doing, and it makes it possible for those who don't. And I think that's where it balances over. But now, most of the time I shoot, well, not most of the time, since 2007. And it's funny, from 2000, and this may come back to Albert's question, from 2007 I really stopped working in black and white. And I think one of the things for photographers, post-digitisation, was when you worked in colour stuff, you still had to put your faith in somebody else to process it a lot of the time, or make a print, unless you were working in unless you were working in transparencies. So when you had black and white, you had that element of control all the way through. And I've started working more in black and white now, but it's a digital process.
Okay.
It's a bit of a dry question, I guess. You've worked for a lot of publications and obviously agencies and commercial clients. I've published photographic magazines now for 45 years nearly. I still use a lot of sets of pictures from photographers like yourself who are interviewed and then provide me with pictures going back a long way. And so far, we're not encountering many problems over who owns the rights to what, or complaints from either the subjects or the original commissioners. But it's getting closer to the surface all the time, the question of clearance for uses. And what is your, how have you retained your copyrights and rights?
A lot of stuff,
Good one.
you know, there's people here for, it depends who we're working for. I've always held my rights to a certain extent, but unless up front somebody says, you know what, we want to buy the rights, happy days, you know. But you do, but I think one of the things is there is a lot of ignorance now and innocence, because we live in a world of immediacy, so people are just throwing it out there. And we used the word celebrity earlier on, and I think that's one thing. I remember in 1994, I didn't know what a celebrity was, and there was an exhibition in New York, and my agent in London at the time asked me for this print for an exhibition, and I said, what's the exhibition? It was in New York, and I said, it's on celebrity. Well, what was that? and it's a word I don't like, because I think it devalues some very talented people, but I think it gives a great deal of creativity and merit to people often who are not very talented. So getting to the rights thing, it's one of the other things is, it's like, well, I was talking to students the other week there, and one of the hardest things is it's never been easier to produce work, and it's never been easier to get it in front of people, but it's never been harder to get them to take notice, because they're inundated with it, and everything is so immediate. And that's the point I made earlier, you know, just about time, that we had time before. But I think I was very fortunate. I worked with some great picture editors and great magazines, and I think there was standards then that I don't know if we've still got today. I still think there's very, very good people out there, but I think they can get suffocated a lot of the time by the pressures put on them, you know. So how do you monitor that? A lot of it's just faith. I mean, the amount of times it's innocence. You know, I go online and I see somebody using the work and it's a student, that's fine. Do you know what I mean? Because photography is more to me than just that image. If I see Motorola use it, I don't know if they still, but you know, a large corporation, I only use that because I did one time, then, you know, you deal with it. But if it's innocence and it's ignorance, then maybe it'll give somebody a bit of pleasure. I don't know. It's hard, it's more difficult though.
Okay.
Thank you.
That
Thank
doesn't
you,
mean if there's
Kevin.
any magazines here that can tear the arse out and use my images for that. Just in case.
Thank you both. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you.